When I was born, doctors said I wouldn't survive the next hour. And eventually that turned into, even if he survives, he'll be blind, deaf, mentally impaired, crippled, basically just a living being. But thanks to all the miracles God did in my life, here I am. And here is my story. It's not in full detail, and it's to the best of my memory at the time. I hope you are encouraged.
I was born at 22 weeks. If I was born 2 months later, I would have been considered a premature birth. But at the time I was born, I was considered a miscarriage. My parents didn't get to see me at all. I was immediately taken away to be weighed. My parents had to wait. Doctors said I wouldn't survive past 3 hours. But when I made it past, my parents had to wait 24 hours to see me. And I have most of the details and also heard this story being told many times by my mother. So it'll be mostly from the perspective of her, from her point of view, not that my father wasn't a part of it. Every time the door opened, because the doctors came with an update every hour was, he's still alive, he's still alive. Every time that door opened, my mother had this fear come upon her. What are they coming to tell me now? Are they coming to tell me he's gone, he's passed away? And people also called, relatives and friends, calling, saying, let him die, he's only going to be a cripple. Why do you want to burden yourself with such a baby? Let him die. But my parents put it in God's hands and said a prayer. And my mother especially wanted a sign from God, just to be rid of this weight of, is he going to make it? Is he going to survive? Is he going to pass away? My mother wanted a sign from God, so she prayed, God, if I reach into his incubator and he takes my finger, I'll take that as a sign from you, God, that he will live. So 24 hours later, on September 28th, 1998, my parents were finally able to go into the room and see me. Doctors warned that it would not be an easy sight, but they came to the room. I was in an incubator hooked up to a ventilation machine because my lungs were not developed. I was not able to breathe myself. So they stood there on either side of the incubator and prayed God's blessing over me. And then my mother remembered of the sign that she had asked God for. So she immediately had these battling thoughts in her mind. This baby's in shock. Doctor said I'll be in shock for at least 3 days. Hands cramped up into tight fists and no reaction at all to anything that's going on around. So my mother had these battling thoughts. What do you want to reach in there now? Touch this newborn baby. He's cramped up. He's in shock. He's never going to respond. But then she ultimately decided to just try it. She prayed and she reached into the incubator and tried to pry my tightly balled fist apart, but it wasn't working. So she just stroked the back of my hand, and I opened my hand wide, and she put her pinky into my hand. My hand was tiny, maybe the size of the tip of her thumb, this tiny, tiny little hand. I couldn't even reach around her pinky. And I grabbed her finger, and I squeezed so hard that my nails turned white. And then I released, and my hand went back into a tight fist. And my mother tried the same thing again, and I repeated that 3 times. So she got the sign from God 3 times that I will live. And I could not have done this of my own strength. It was God that was manipulating my body to do this. And I lay there, this tiny baby weighing 600 grams, limbs seeming too long for my body, everything kind of out of proportion, veins visible through my translucent skin, just a tiny, tiny living being with, according to doctors, no chance of life. If I lived past the day, they said I would die in a few days. If I live a week, I would die in 2 weeks. They always predicted I would pass away. There's 0% chance that I'll live. No baby like this has ever lived. After 2 weeks, I had an x-ray done on my brain, and it is very common at this time for the brain to start bleeding because of the pressure on the head. The brain starts bleeding and then causes brain damage, and the baby passes away. So they did an x-ray. I had a little bit of bleeding, but there was no brain damage. And also, if you're hooked up to a ventilation system and in the incubator, for 2 weeks, doctors say you'll be mentally impaired. And I was hooked up to ventilation for 6 weeks, and here I am. At 1 month, because my lungs were not developed, I was receiving a medicine called cortisone, and this causes the blood sugar to rise. And at around 1 month, my blood sugar rose to a very dangerous level, to a life-threatening level, and the doctors couldn't do anything anymore. They even contacted specialists, but they were at their end. They couldn't do anything any further. So my parents went home. Just as they got home, they received a phone call from friends and also members of the church. We have some brothers here from the church to pray. Do you want to join us? So they went. And it was said through a prophecy of the Holy Spirit from God, I will stretch out my hand, and your faith and the faith of your church will be strengthened. And these brothers that came there to pray, they had no idea what's going on. They asked afterwards, what's going on? My parents said, we have a newborn in the hospital in critical condition. And the next day, my parents returned to the hospital, and doctors and nurses are come running. A miracle has happened. The blood sugar is perfect. And one nurse talked to them a bit more privately and said, I've been working here for, I'm not exactly sure the number of years it was now, but I believe it was 20 plus years at least. And she said, I've never seen something like this. Only God could have done this. At 3 months, I was finally able to be taken home. Of course, the hospital will still try to keep the baby there, but my mother, I think she kind of had to fight to take me home and take responsibility over me. And I often forgot to breathe, so I was hooked up to a monitor with an alarm. Whenever I stopped breathing, the alarm would go off. I could also see. My mother took a toy and she waved it around in front of my eyes, and I followed it with my eyes. No blind child would do that. And if we just go back a bit, the doctor said there's 0% chance of life. Absolutely no way that I will live. And if I live, after that 2-week x-ray that they did, they said now we can hope for a chance of life. But don't deceive yourselves. Don't give yourself any false hope. This will only be a living being, completely paralyzed, mentally impaired, blind, deaf, crippled. Just a living being with absolutely no way to communicate. And here I was now at home 3 months later, able to see. And to return to the story of my not breathing, I was hooked up to the alarm, and this was very taxing on my mother, because the alarm would also often go off at night and kind of violently awakening her with such a loud noise. And then at one point, it got too much for her. She couldn't take it anymore. I had to be shaken to kind of be awakened, so I remember to start breathing again. And she couldn't take it anymore. And she said, God, you gave him life. You promised that he would live. This machine won't save his life. And in an act of faith, she removed the machine, put it in a drawer, and it was sitting in a drawer for a year till it was returned to the hospital. I never needed it again. Never forgot to breathe after that. And then later on, as time went on, my health was also very very sensitive. If somebody walked past me, you know that breeze that you get when somebody walks past you, if I got that, I would be very sick the next day. And my chest was also very pointed out. My back was falling in. I was kind of disfigured. My mom went to a massage therapist, and the therapist said, I don't want to touch this baby, which is understandable. And she said to my mother, take him home, do it yourself. So with a lot of prayer, every day my mom massaged me and prayed constantly, and she was able to put my chest and my ribs back into place. But I was still completely deaf. My mom tried a lot of different things. She took a book and she slammed it on the table with all her force, but I had zero response. And a long time of praying with no results was very discouraging, to the point where my parents were wondering, is he ever going to hear? You pray for a while and it seems like God just doesn't hear. Then one night, my family just gathered for a prayer. It was no special prayer, just a prayer before going to sleep. And when my family prayed, my mother always took me in her arms as if presenting me to God. God, here's this child. When you were on earth, you healed everyone. You didn't say to anybody, this is your yoke, you have to be sick. That's my will for you. You healed everyone, and you can heal this child, God. I present him to you here, heal him. So this evening now, family gathered to pray, and just as my mother started praying, I started screaming with all my strength. So my mother took me out of the room, calmed me down, and I looked at her with this pleading look and looked around in fear. She took me back into the room and calmed me down, and then took me back into where everyone was praying, and I immediately started screaming again. After the third time this repeated itself, God gave her the realization, I can hear. I'm just shocked and scared by the sudden noise, not being able to hear anything, and then it suddenly being so loud. I had to be alone with somebody monitoring me for a month after that to gradually get used to the noise. I may have skipped a lot of the details, and it's also my first time telling the story, but I just wanted to share it for the glory of God. And this is not to boast in my own strength or that I'm so smart, but doctor said I would be completely mentally impaired, paralyzed, just a living being. And I even graduated university. Like I said, this is not to boast. This is just God's glory and God's grace in my life. I am still visually impaired, but I'm sure even with that, God has a special plan. Because he says in his word that his ways are higher than ours, as much higher than the heaven is from the earth. And his thoughts are not our thoughts. We will not understand God's ways often, but we can just trust in him that he has a plan for us.